okay to fail. Like, if it doesn't work out, it's all right. It's not the end of the world.
You're not relying on your past accomplishments to determine whether you will be successful or even daring to try something new.
The mark of a good leader is one who's able to be creative and think outside the box.
Seema, we're back with another episode. What's going on today?
A lot of amazing things. I've spent all week connecting with really incredible women. Just happen to be women. And you know what? Today on this show, here we are again connecting with another incredible woman.
Absolutely. But before we connect with this absolutely incredible woman who will probably just ask to be patient for 30 more seconds and just eavesdrop on us. Seema, you had a big night tonight. Tell us about your big night.
I did. I had a really big night. I went to a launch party for Austin Woman magazine. And the reason
a launch party for Austin Woman magazine. What is all that about?
Well, I don't know if you would call it a launch party, but I guess it is, because they started this initiative called Changemakers, and this is the first year they're doing it. And yours truly made the list.
Wow. Slow clap. That's amazing. Congratulations.
Super excited.
That is great. Hey, Happy and Human Nation, if you're hearing this, send Seema a DM and congratulate her on this amazing award for being a change maker in Austin. With that said, we won't continue punishing our amazing guests by just hearing us banter back and forth. Ladies and gentlemen, we have someone here today who is going to give us permission to lean into our purpose. We have a guest that lives in Austin, in Seema's backyard. She's English, so buckle up. Buckle those seatbelts really tight because her accent is going to blow your socks off. Seema, why don't you do the honors, since you've reached out to Malti, and tell us about Malti a little bit more?
Absolutely. So first of all, welcome, Malti, to Happy and Human.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to tell all of our amazing listeners all about you. So at first jump, if I look at your Instagram, I see a bunch of art. Really beautiful art that I honestly have never seen quite done in the way that you do. But behind that artist is this incredibly accomplished and highly educated person. You went to Cambridge. You have a degree in physics and a PhD in biophysics, and then somehow jumped into this identity of being an artiste. And now you have transplanted yourself. You've lived all around the world, born in London, and have had a wealth of experiences, and find yourself now smack dab in the middle of Austin after being everywhere. Welcome so much. Tell all of our listeners a little bit more about you that I may have missed, because there's no way I got it all.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I think the one, middle step that was missed out is after the PhD, after the academic world, I thought it wasn't for me long term. I didn't want to run my own lab. So then I tried my hand at management consulting and worked at Boston Consulting Group for a while before moving into the world of being an artist. So I've done a bit of academia, the science world. I've been in the world of business and the corporate environment, and now I'm in the creative world here. So I think it's quite interesting reflecting back on the journey and all the lessons learned and how everything applies to life today as well.
Now you're in the creative world, and I'm wondering if you were always in the creative world, and while you were working through Boston Consulting Group, you were getting your PhD, that creative energy, what were you doing with it? How is it affecting you? How is it driving you? And more importantly, not just maybe talk about, if there was a negative effects, but talk about the positive benefits.
Yeah, maybe I chose my words incorrectly, because I would say the life of an academic is actually creative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming up with new discoveries in science, new ideas. To get a PhD in the UK, you have to discover something new. You can't just prove something that doesn't exist, unfortunately. So there's a lot of creative thinking around that. And then also something like management consulting, which often, people talk about slides and decks and bringing advice doesn't necessarily scream creative, but actually there is a lot of creative problem solving in that space. So I would say I've always been creative and have just exercised that creativity in through different mediums. One in a sort of science approaching unknowns way, then in a creative problem solving, how do I solve these business problems in a way that someone else who knows a lot more about the environment that they're working in hasn't seen the solution. And now again, visually, how do I create? That's kind of how I see it. I think people are creative in lots of different outlets, and everything is creative in some way or can be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that a lot of leadership, the mark of a good leader is one who's able to be creative and think outside the box. So it sounds like that's what you were really doing when whether that was in option 1, 2, or 3 that you talked about, but really finding a way to tap into that creativity and solution seek rather than nail down within what already was constructed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I'm curious. I mean, it's just such a wide range, right? From physics, then a little minor shift to biophysics, but then to the corporate world, and then to, paints and canvases and things like that. So, and I see there's a lot of architecture also in your work.
Mm-hmm.
So how, what? My brain is still trying to reconcile how one person can do so many things and excel at them all. It's incredible.
So I think I can't remember the name of this test. I took this test that is like, what are your strengths or something? This is in the corporate environment. And I think my top one by far was I'm a learner. I love learning new things. I don't like being stagnant as a person. If I don't feel like I'm learning something, I get bored and I just stop paying attention. So as long as I'm learning something, I will always strive to do my best and absorb as much as possible. And I've just always been like that, to be honest. And I would say, I don't know, I've always been interested in business. My dad had his own company. There was a family business. I just assumed as a child I would take over it. They sold that off way before I was anywhere near a grown up. And then I just loved learning about the world. The stars were super exciting to me as a child again. So science, physics, I love maths. All of it made sense. And then also I just love to draw and paint and study the things that I see around me and translate them onto a page. And so it's always this constant, I guess, theme running through my life has always been learning and striving to understand the world around me in some way. And I think that's, across the 3 sort of careers I've had, that has always remained true.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm looking at the painting behind you, and, for anyone who's listening to this, you may want to check out the YouTube video. There's just a stunning image right behind Malti here. And I'm listening to her tell us that she's a learner and she wants to learn. But so far, I've only heard that whatever you've tried your hand at, you have excelled, right?
Not true.
I mean, the way I understand it is that you have to get, at least in America, a bachelor's degree to then get a master's, to then get a PhD. Is there anything higher than a PhD in physics? No. So you got the highest, most topmost degree in PhD.
Yes.
Your art is fantastic. What drives you to excel?
That's a great question. And one that I have often discussed with my husband because we have very different personalities. I think for me, it comes down to, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it well. And if I'm going to invest the time, it's sort of, I may as well spend as much time as I need to really get it done and do it well. And so I'm an obsessive worker. I would say I'm a workaholic. Even now, as in the sort of creative art business that I set up, I work way too much, if anything, and it's just part of my personality. I love to explore and spend the time learning, and as I do that, excelling, I just think just comes with the hours, really.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to people who may have an inkling and certainly have the capacity to invest the time and work, but unknowingly or unintentionally make the calculation in their head that it may not be worth it, right? Like I would love to paint something like that, but looking at where my life is and all of the priorities I have, I don't feel like it's worth it to put in the effort. And there's no guarantee I'll even be half as good as that. So I would stop myself and say, well, don't try that. Just stick to your lane. Stick to what you know.
But it depends on what you're trying to achieve with trying to do it in the first place. So
What do you
is
mean?
it that do you want to paint or paint because you want to create amazing work that you're super proud of that you think other people will buy? Or do you want to create something because you'll be proud of it and it's a personal journey? And I think there's a massive difference between a personal inward look and what you're excelling at versus what other people are looking at. And for me, I realized I just need to concentrate on what I think I'm doing well rather than worrying about what other people do, because that gets very distracting and exhausting, and just for me personally just makes me sink if I start comparing myself to other people. Like there are always people who are better than you. I went to Cambridge, I was top of my class until that point, and suddenly I'm surrounded by like the best minds in the country or even internationally, and I was pretty middle of the road when it came to the academic world at that point. But I liked my degree. I really enjoyed the subject, and then I decided I wanted to go and get a PhD, so I did. If I had worried about being the best, that would have dragged me down. And I knew people who did always worry about coming on top of, number one in the class, and it just wasn't worth it. Who cares at the end of the day? What's good enough?
Yeah, I remember in dental school, we would call them gunners. So Dinesh, I don't know if you had the same term in law school, but we would call them gunners, and they would sit in the front row, and all they cared about was the grades and like, did they go and get every single word that the professor said and note it down. And some of them, like, they wouldn't even share their notes if somebody else was out sick or they missed for whatever reason. And, it became very evident that the joy in learning just wasn't there as compared to maybe the non-traditional students who dental school was their second career or their third career even. And they really had this joy for just being there and absorbing the subject. And it sounds like for you, it really was about the thrill of learning what it is that was being taught.
Yeah,
For sure.
my world just came crashing down because I remembered a quote that if you're in a room and you can't figure out who the idiot is, then it's you. And now I'm thinking back to my law school days, and I don't remember who the gunners were. Does that mean I was the gunner? Seema, we need to unpack this in a future episode. No, I'm kidding.
This.
No, I think that's such, Malti, your answer was really great, and Seema, what you said, yeah, so true. And I was having a conversation the other day with someone who was in a position where maybe the other people around them weren't recognizing how great they were. And I something struck me is that too often times we give the responsibility for identifying our value to those outside of us. And then in return, we wait for their permission to express our brilliance. We wait for someone to say, great job, keep going. right? Or we wait for someone to say, you're so important to this project. Um, how else can you help us before we're willing to really take the shine off? You know that old saying about the Buddha, the gold Buddha that was
Mm-hmm.
covered in
Yeah.
dirt, layers of dirt,
Mm-hmm.
and too often we wait for someone else's permission to rub the dirt off to allow our brilliance to shine. And it sounds like what you were talking about. The way to rub that off is to look inward rather than to looking to other people. What would you say to that?
I think so. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have 100% looked outward a lot of points through my life, but I think being able to truly understand yourself, what drives you, what you're proud of, is far more fulfilling, especially as you get older. I think you just realize people don't really care or remember that much.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
if the world around you is, busy and people don't notice anyway, like who are you really trying to impress? Like what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I always think.
So my question to that really is, because
Mm,
I mean, you've had such a wide variety of identity, if you will, right?
yeah,
And I
for
think
sure.
for us South Asians, right, as like the parents, like I'm thinking from their perspective, and we're coming from a very tangible world, right? My daughter is a lawyer, my daughter is a doctor, my daughter is a physicist, right? And then to just sort of jump ship, proverbially speaking, into
Hmm.
something completely having nothing to do with the other.
Yes.
And then you did it again, right? So there's this period of reconciliation of who I perceive you to be versus who you really feel good being. What do you say about that?
It's hard. It was, for me personally, it was hard. I'm the oldest daughter of three as well, so I was always the first one to do things in my immediate family, and none of my cousins had pivoted in this way
Mm-hmm.
either. So I didn't have anyone else's, or no one close to me had sort of trodden this path, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
and done this before. So for me, it was hard. For my parents, to be fair, they just didn't understand what I did. After I'm doing my PhD and doing physics in an academic world, they didn't know what the sort of management consulting was, and sort of but like everyone understood I was in a corporate job at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and you know in the business world, working in the city. So that was what I was. I was now corporate. And that again was people took that one on board because corporate job in the South Asian community means you're getting paid well, which is
Yeah.
what
Mm.
people care about at the end of the day.
And good
Um,
benefits, right? And good benefits. If you think back to a government job in India, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
mhm,
got good benefits.
yeah, absolutely. But then pivoting to the world of an artist, that was a little bit harder to explain. And for people, I think a lot of family thought it was a hobby.
Mm.
And my parents were like, no, she's doing this full time. And they're like, what do you mean she's doing this full time? So my parents were actually on board with the change because I had the background and foundation. So, I've made my money. I can take that leap of faith. I can invest in myself and take this change. And if I need to, I can go back into the corporate world. I have a robust CV that allows me that. So I have a safety blanket.
Hmm.
And I think because I have that safety blanket for my immediate family, they were happy with me trying this out and seeing how it goes.
Hmm.
And then beyond that, I think just just you know constantly telling people that this is now what I do, and
Yeah.
showing up and being consistent about showing up. I think now the whole family knows that this is what I do and are very excited by it, in fact. But it did take a while to bring everyone around and take them on that journey. But I think that's just part of life. And if you just haven't been exposed to different walks of life, different experiences, it takes time to understand what that looks like, and that is a credible option as well.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a question, but I want to be careful at how I ask to make sure that you're interested in answering it.
I'm so intrigued now.
Let's just say there's no one else listening, even though I hope there are
Let's
thousands.
go.
There might be hundreds of people listening. To give us your highlight reel, tell us. You said to see how it goes. Tell us how well it really is going. Don't hold back. Don't be humble. Just give it to us. Tell us how well it is really going for you.
I would say it's going better than expected. I say that for context, I've been now publicly showing my work for about a year and a half. Probably, I'd say I found my style really about a year ago now. Last year, I ended up doing a lot of festivals. I was living in California at the time, and I sold really well to the point where I realized I needed to paint more. And for me, that was what I was aiming for. I want to be able to prove that I can sell my work, and that was a proof to myself more than anything else. And that was such a great feeling. It's very exciting. There's lots of ideas now bubbling up, and I'm spending more time on trying to grow this business. If it wasn't going well, I will say this, my original plan was to go back into the corporate world. I was actually taking a year out, wasn't planning to pivot into art full time, and started doing this, and then thought, you know what, I'm taking a year out. Let's see how it goes. If it, at the end of the year, there's some proof points there, the pilot has gone well, I will carry on for another year. And for the foreseeable future, I will be doing this, and I will reevaluate, but this is it now. And so I say it's going well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We're so proud of you. That's amazing. So good to hear.
Yeah. I mean, it's always nice to have that safety blanket. You've mentioned, that is there. It's not like you just jumped in front of an oncoming train, and I will say also, it still requires a huge amount of courage. It requires you stepping into being another version of yourself that's previously unknown. And I think, at least I'll speak for myself, as an Indian woman, giving myself permission, as Dinesh said, is something that I've really struggled with in the past. And I remember, making my own shifts and experiencing things and not realizing that what the struggle was giving myself permission. So can you speak to the listeners more about what that looks like for you? Because you've had to give yourself permission over and over again for a lot of different stuff.
Yes. I think for me, for context, it took me a long time to call myself an artist. Even when I was doing this, I also kept it a secret from everyone I knew, apart from my husband. I didn't even tell my parents I was trying to sell my work to the public when I started doing this. Giving myself permission involves breaking expectations of myself that other people have imposed on me. And that is a constant challenge, I would say, for me personally as well. It's something I grapple with. But I strongly believe a lot of people feel like this. There's the outward version, the person you project to everyone else, but then there's the real inner voice, inner person, inner child that's still not grown up. All these other facets of you that not everyone sees. So, there's something about, again, just looking inwards to understand what are your core values, what is really driving you, what will make you fulfilled as a person, and therefore what will make you a better person. And I think there's something I'm constantly thinking about: what is going to fulfill me, what is going to give me purpose, and how do I
Mhm.
build a life that like lets me do that? Because at the end of the day, I'm the one living my life. No one else is living it
Mhm.
for me. So I better get
Mm.
thinking about these things and figure it out for myself, and that can change as well. So
Mhm.
I think that's another thing, being kind
Yeah.
to yourself and knowing that that will change over time, and that's totally normal and part of the journey and adventure.
Yeah. So my question there is more, was this made muddier because of the experiences and cultural expectations of like, you're a woman, you're South Asian, you do what others are expected you to do, and then you don't, it doesn't matter what fulfills you. You just kind of, I mean, because it's so easy to just be like, it doesn't matter, right? Like you do what you're supposed to do and you just muscle through it. But that real coming to that realization is huge.
Yeah. I I don't know at what point I started realizing this for myself, but I feel like coming from a South Asian background as a woman, there are a lot of expectations. This whole idea of being, perfect. I can make round chapatis, by the way. My parents have taught me well.
Uh,
But I don't know. It's just at some point I was like, there has to be something else for me personally. Mm.
one thing I think about, and something I worry about with this podcast is that
Mm.
there is a subset of people that will listen to the inspiring stories here. And a group of them are in a place or stage in life where the demands on them are of such caliber that they don't have much time luxury or financial luxury or the ability to change or pivot the way you
Mhm.
have or some of our other guests have. But there is probably, I'm speculating, a group of listeners out there who have an inkling and have the ability, whether it's a financial blanket or support from a family or the time to make such a pivot, but for one reason or another, are not making that pivot,
Mhm.
and then potentially are listening to these inspiring stories and then might feel bad about where their life is, knowing that there is this potential or this capability in them, but they're not able to materialize it, right? I'm talking about just that subset. What is something you would say to that person to once and for all have them turn inward in the manner you did, to give it a go with a level of reckless abandon
Mhm.
that would make it more likely than not that it ends up as successful as you've been?
Well, I wouldn't say be reckless about, like abandon everything. I'm
Fair.
I'm a I'm a very risk averse person by nature, actually. Um, what I would say though is do something. Like take that first step, take some action, build a habit out of that, and go from there. Because I think that feeling that you get that you need to be doing something, but it feels so overwhelming, and being successful at something feels so far off. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know, focusing on successes, again, to me, I get very stressed very easily. But one of the things, if I think about how am I going to be successful, I start drowning in trying to figure that out. That feels overwhelming to me. So
Right.
for me, it's like, what can I do right now?
Mhm.
What is the next step? And like, what are the small things, tangible things that will help me get somewhere that's a
Yeah.
little bit further, or learn something new, and then there's some momentum that comes with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's something around that I would always suggest. And I've had a few people recently reach out, people from my past, people also from Cambridge, studying various other things. A
Uh,
couple of people reached out being like, oh my gosh, don't know if you remember me. I'm like, of course I remember you. What do you mean? Um, but but they were asking me about what can they do. They still need to stay in their full-time roles and don't have that luxury of time necessarily, but they have that inkling and want to do something. And I think it is just taking that step, carve out an hour a week, do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
Mhm.
love it. One of my core beliefs is that success
Mhm.
is the accumulation of 1,000 or 10,000 small actions or decisions. So good. Your work was featured by a professional sports team, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about that? Then I have a question for you.
Yeah. Last year, the San Jose Sharks, the national hockey team, reached out to me. Reached out to me to do some work with them for it was a South Asian Heritage Night. They were celebrating Diwali
Mm.
and wanted a new crest and sort of shoulder patches designed for the team. Really awesome experience.
Yeah, and then you were selected, right?
And then I was selected. Yeah.
So good. So the reason I brought that up is the reason I've heard this somewhere that the reason children look up to athletes is because they were brave enough to go for it, despite the enormous odds stacked against them. Right? Like
Hmm.
we look at that athlete or LeBron James or a football player, Patrick Mahomes, and they went for their dream and they made it. And when you were talking, you remind me of that athlete. And in fact, when you mentioned that your friends from Cambridge are reaching out to you, um, that and seeing that there's a bit of light or spark in you that has become brighter because you followed your dream,
Mm.
and hoping that by connecting with you, that spark can be lit inside of them, right? Uh, does that motivate you to keep going and to take up more space and to share your message wider?
It really does. I feel like I've learned so much from other people who've, you know, done something similar, but I haven't seen many people with my specific story doing it. So I definitely want to share that it's possible. I want to take up that space. It's hard though. It's hard because I am a natural introvert. So going and meeting people and trying to amplify my voice does take a lot of energy. But I absolutely love it when people share stories about how they've taken that first step, or they were inspired to lean into something creative and something that's been at the back of their mind for a really long time. That means so much to me hearing that.
Yeah. I
Mm.
think the beauty of what we're talking about here is that there isn't a black or white. So, for example, what I mean by that is we just earlier talked about how you have to really shine from within. You have to, as long as you look for motivation externally, you're going to be going down a rabbit hole that's very unfulfilling and dark and potentially lonely. And yet, here we are on the other side, and all three of us are no different in that um, that motivation or that validation that we feel from externally from somebody reaching out and saying, "Hey, you're doing amazing work. I'm curious, how might I get started on whatever it is that's the next thing for me," is also deeply valuable,
Hmm.
right? So I think for listeners too, I used to come from a world, or I did come from a world where my main thought was it's either A or B, right? I'm either a dentist or I'm nothing, or I'm either, in this case, I'm not dependent on anyone or I am dependent on someone. And I think what the beauty of what we're teasing out here is that it is an integration of your existence internally and how you see the external world and what you allow and attract into your life.
Mm.
The people that you're attracting that are reaching out to you, the ones that are sitting there being snarky and saying like, I can't believe she would, who does she think she is? Those are not the people reaching out to you, right? But who you're attracting are those people that are willing to sort of take that first step, even though they may not know what that looks like. So it's a dance, and I think it's so beautiful that you show up authentically when you do.
No, I think that's really interesting because I'd never really thought of it that way. But it's completely true.
Mm.
I mean, nothing is black and white. Let's face it, and it is. I don't know. I think there's a lot to say with people reaching out. I feel like there's a real connection being made, though. People and the connections are motivating, and so there's people reaching out, you know, that they feel like they're learning something or they're getting something out of seeing you and what you've achieved, and that to me is forging a connection more than anything else, and that is really exciting. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
Who's Malti Lee today?
An adventurer.
Oh, so good.
I love that.
I don't know. I feel like life is an adventure. That's I think my word for 2024, adventuring. I say this because last year, I mean, I was based in California. Austin wasn't on the cards. My business was taking off in California. And then I think Labor Day weekend, we visited for the first time. And within the week, we decided that we were moving. That was it.
Wow.
So we're adventuring and I'm adventuring. And it's just like, you know what, let's go, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we can move back. We can move anywhere. It's fine. If you don't try it now, then when? So.
And I think that's sort of the reckless abandon Dinesh was referring to. It's you know, right? Like, it's not that you're being careless for your safety, but it's that faith that you have what it takes to take that next step and pivot if it doesn't work according to what you want it to, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also the not taking yourself too seriously that we were talking about before we started recording. I think, you know, it's okay to fail. Like, if it doesn't work out, it's all right. It's not the end of the world. I think, I'm in the privileged position that I can move across countries, and I acknowledge that. But yeah, it's possible.
When I hear you speak, I don't hear confidence in what you're describing. What I hear is self-confidence, in that you're not relying on your past accomplishments to determine whether you will be successful or even daring to try something new. You know you have your back. You're willing to bet on yourself 10 out of 10 times. And that's such a rare quality for people, especially those of us that have been raised in a culture that is predominantly we based, in that the community's interests come first, right? Don't bring shame to the family. What will people say? You know, don't be selfish. Look out for the family first. Talk to us a little bit about that. Does that resonate? And where do you think that level of self-confidence has come, or how have you been able to develop it?
I've never really thought of it that way. And I think it's really interesting as I reflect now. I think the self-confidence has probably come from the fact that I've pivoted a few times now, and things have, you know, kind of worked out. I think the self-confidence also comes from the fact that I have a safety blanket to fall back on. I have a great CV. I can go get a corporate job wherever I need to. I can move back to England if I need to. Like, I have my backup plans. If all else fails, I will move back to my parents' home. I'm fine with that, you know. They will take me in. I have my investments. I can liquidate those, you know. So I have backup plans. And so I think having that gives me, I guess, permission to try new things. And also it means that I can, I don't know, I feel self-confident that I will make the right decisions. I've mentioned before, I tend to be risk adverse,
Mhm.
but then at the same time, I'm saying, I'm going to go to Austin, and if it doesn't work, I'm just going to move somewhere else. So that
Yeah.
could feel a little bit reckless to some people. But because I have my backup plans, I think that's where I get my confidence from. I know that if if things really don't work out, I'll be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really such a beautiful, liberating, truly liberating belief to have, right? Is I will be okay no matter what. My question more is, what would you say to people? You've done this thought process of what would happen in the worst case scenario, right?
Yes.
That's really scary to do, and it's sometimes that's what it takes, though, for you to be able to take that first step, however small that is. It requires you to is it the word catastrophize over what it is, right? But what would you say to people who are just sort of stuck, like unwilling to go there and examine what that looks like, unwilling to examine the worst case scenario, or unwilling to even consider that there might be a life that's drastically different, but also drastically richer? I think when I think about people like that who just are so rooted to, this is my only option, this is my only choice, I just have to take a step back and breathe and make room for my own discomfort that comes up with that, and make space for that and allow it, because they're a spiritual being on their own path to whatever, whenever. And I have I can help them get there by showing compassion. And that's really it,
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, what comes up for me is like Malti. Our greatest desire is to see ourselves the way others see us, right? And if you think about it, if you think about a child that you may have or a younger sibling, you see the infinite universe in them of possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I know that my son or daughter don't see that. And now that I'm a parent, I know that my parents see infinite possibility in me and would never talk me out of doing something. Like if I said to my parents now that, I just think I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a lawyer, or I want to do this or that, they would never look at me and say, "What are you? You lost your mind?" Like, no, you can't do that. They would encourage me the same way they would if I was a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old saying I want to be a fireman or a policeman or something like that. But I don't see myself that way, and I don't think a lot of people see themselves that way. We see ourselves as fixed, and that's why there's this wonderful quote: "You're not a tree. You can get up and move if you'd like." Right? And so I think for me, I would implore myself to try to find a way to help that person, or at least share with them that there's more than they can see.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. What comes to mind for me is, we are limited by our 5 senses, our 5 human senses. So the way we see the world is so different than the way, for example, a bat or a spider or something, sees the world. And what they see is true as well as what we see. And just because we don't understand doesn't make it untrue. It doesn't make it not an option or not unavailable or not available. It's just, are you willing to kind of dig through those layers, that stickiness, to then, what if you were to lose it all, but in the process gain everything?
I think one other thought that this has sparked for me is, whilst the person, these people might not be able to see themselves in different ways, I think maybe one thing I might do is to share other people's stories who are in a similar situation and learned something, or they had their horizons widened perhaps. So in reading and learning about other stories where there are some relatable elements, they might be able to open up their own sort of horizons or see beyond the horizons that they currently have, because everyone's a function of their own experiences and their own lived experiences at the end of the day. You can't fault them for thinking in this way. There's a reason that they have the beliefs that they do. So I think being able to nudge new ideas, or sort of, I guess, sow new ideas in a way that isn't going to infringe on their beliefs at that moment in time would for me be very important as well. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Happy and Human podcast, where we share stories so that you too can be inspired, as well as the inspiration that we draw from the fantastic guests that we bring on. No, I totally agree with that. I think all of that is right. I think we learn from stories. We see ourselves in other people, and that is really, the impetus for Seema and I to bring such terrific guests on here to not only inspire and motivate us, but hopefully share that inspiration with other people from seeing what you do. But I think you also mentioned one critical component, and Seema had touched on this earlier. It's the compassion and empathy in understanding their multiple perspectives. And if we can put ourselves in that person's shoes, we can dial down whatever urgency or emotional trigger that we feel. And even if we don't agree with them, we can try to understand from that person's perspective why the timing may not be right, or they may not feel comfortable, or things like that, and not create a scenario where we're likely to cause more harm than good, right? And I think sharing stories, like you said, is such a powerful way of doing that. And my personal experience has been, it's much easier to motivate and inspire by example than through words.
Yeah. I saw a meme earlier this week, and it was basically to the effect of, growing and doing something new hurts. So does staying the same, right? Either way, you're hurting. So pick which kind of hurt you want and move forward. And, it's not to say that I would feel bad for everybody that chooses, if you repeatedly choose to make the same choice, but you can still extend compassion no matter where you're at in life. Maybe whether you understand their choices or not, whether it's the choice you would make or not. I think that compassion is so critical. And it just came so naturally from you, Malti, like just really, truly, it came with such authenticity. And so I wanted to celebrate that, because we need more of it in this world. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think that Seema hit it. I mean, it comes so naturally from you. And I think for a large part that has been probably one of the secret ingredients to your success, and to be able to connect and create such art that connects with people. I think, I'm not an artist, so I'll butcher the saying, but there has to be a saying out there. If not, I'm going to make it up. That I'm going to relate it to like our parents cooking, right? Like you can tell when your parents cook with love, right?
Yeah.
So there's got to be something that analogous for art. You can tell when the artist puts themselves into their art and it comes through them, right? Is there something like that?
I have no idea, but I'm sure there is, honestly.
Okay, there is now.
There is now,
We
exactly.
created it now. But I think that's the point. Like your empathy and compassion comes through your art, which is why it is so relatable and can connect on so many different levels.
Yeah. So I actually have a really a question truly for people who are listening, you haven't checked out Malti's art. Like there's an abstract background, and then there is these, I wouldn't say hard lines, but definite lines. They're clear, tangible lines that are reflected in iconic buildings and things. And then there's the softer flowers that are imposed, right? The nature or what have you. And you talk a little bit about why you paint that way.
Yeah.
But for somebody who comes from a very technical background, my thought always goes to procedure, right? Like how, I know with creativity, there is no necessarily procedure per se, but like, how do you decide what building, what colors, what flowers, like how can you kind of take us in your creative mind?
Absolutely. So I would say there is a process for sure. I'm a process driven person as well. And so I'll share a little bit about why I love these paintings. I'm really leaning into this style. I love color, number one. So I will always pick my colors first. So what am I in the mood for? And that's a very me indulgent, mood driven part of the process. I'll then decide the building. It's typically driven by where my friends are traveling or something I'm listening to right now. Actually, I'm listening to a lot of sort of history of different empires. So I've been leaning into sort of Byzantine and Mughal architecture at the moment because I'm just really enjoying learning about the histories, and so I'm picking the places I've been and the memories I have of these different places that I've seen while I learn new things, because I'm a learner. I've told you that before. And then I'll sort of bring that together, and then the flowers for me is just, I grew up in London, spent a lot of time in Europe, and so flowers were always against the backdrop of beautiful buildings. And so even now I really lean into that. When I moved to California, I just didn't get that in the spring. I was like, where are the buildings, number one? But number two, where are all the sort of trees that are blooming and against everything? I don't know. I missed Europe at that point. It was when I couldn't travel because I was waiting for my green card. And that's actually how the whole series started, was actually I couldn't travel and I didn't know when I'd be able to travel internationally again.
Wow.
So I channeled that frustrated energy into my paintings instead.
Okay, so you just hit on, first of all, two things. One, you moved to Austin, where I feel like nothing grows very well.
I'm used to California. It's all the same to me now.
It's like, we have no seasons here, but we do have a lot of amazing food. So that's one. But two, I love what you said about a lot of people would just sit there and take frustration and complain about it. And what you did was acknowledge that frustration and then turn it into something beautiful.
Yeah.
I just, and then I'm floored by this. Was this something that you've always been just sort of naturally adept at doing? Is like taking something and flipping it and reframing it? Or was this a learned skill?
Learned skill. My mum was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was very young. And so I've grown up in a household where we are learning how to manage a degenerative illness and cope with that. So I think a lot of, like, as we've had this conversation, I think actually a lot of the person I've become has really been because of this, unlucky disease that hit our family, and learning to manage life and grow up and navigate everything in that situation. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, so I think this now as well is just, I know how to deal with negative energy. It's okay.
Wow. That's really inspiring. And we're sending your mom all the positive energy that there is, because we know
She will
that
appreciate
that's healing.
that.
Yes, I really believe we can transfer energy. So sending
Give
her
her a
lots of
shout
love.
out. Give her a shout
Yeah.
out. Let's send her some energy right now.
Yeah, give her a shout out, Malti.
Mommy, if you're listening, we're sending you lots of love here from the US.
I love
She's
it.
based in London right now.
Yeah.
So good.
Terrific.
Do you think she'll listen to this podcast?
Oh, she 100% will. I told her earlier on I was going to be recording this evening, and she was like, send it to me as soon as it's out. I'm like, okay.
Absolutely.
She sounds
Can't wait.
amazing.
Yes.
She's
sounds
awesome.
amazing.
So, Malti, we've talked so much about your journey, and there's a million other questions, and we could probably go forever. But what have we not asked you?
You haven't asked me about my biggest failures. I feel like we've talked a lot about successes and all the good stuff, but what are the things that haven't gone to plan or haven't worked out? And I think when we talk about successes, I think it's also important to talk about what hasn't gone the way you'd hoped they would go as well.
Let's do it. Let's open
let's
the
do
closet
it.
and pull all the skeletons out. Tell us the failures. Tell us the bad stuff.
Bad stuff. I would say.
Are we doing this? We're doing it, right?
We are doing this. I'm thinking about it right now. I'm like, oh no, what have I just said and let myself in for? No, I think something that, I mean, it's a failure right now, but I will address it soon. I really want to be fluent in a second language. So I speak Gujarati, I speak English, obviously. I speak Gujarati at home, but conversational enough to handle family situations and cannot read or write or anything like that. I speak Spanish, but my fluency has come down since I lived there. And I really regret that. So when I have my children, I want to raise them bilingual in some language. My husband is Korean, so my new plan is to learn Korean and be fluent in that, because he is fluent in Korean and that's his first language, and so he can read and write. So last year, or the year before, when I started painting, actually one of the other things I was planning to do was to learn Korean, because I suddenly had all this time, but I didn't stick with it and I didn't build those habits of learning, and I'm no good right now. But I have enrolled in a class and I start on Saturday. So I am going to work on that and I will get there in the next couple of years, hopefully.
Is that what keeps you up at night?
Right now, yes. Like, no joke. It's really irritating me. It's like under my skin. And
interesting.
And maybe this is another reason that I lean into stuff and just I have an obsessive personality, I think. So if I decide I want to do something, I have to go do it eventually. And that's one of these things that's really got under my skin.
Yeah, I can feel your energy. Like, it's sort of downshifted and you're really like in it. It's sticky.
Yeah, it's sticky. It feels very sticky right now, but that's okay. I'm addressing it. I've taken my steps to go address that one.
And I think it's so interesting that you called it a failure, even though you didn't not learn it. You just, like, I don't know. I'm so curious. Why is that?
I didn't. That's the thing. I was planning to learn it 2 years ago and I didn't. I'm doing it now. Maybe.
I guess I would be interested in knowing, is there a reason why it's important for you to learn Korean that's not apparent to us, that makes that raises the dial or the importance on you learning this?
For our future children, I would say. So there is a why. There's a real reason. We decided that Korean would be the most sensible language to raise our children in, for them to be bilingual. But for that to happen, I need to be able to speak enough Korean to be one step ahead of said future children in their learning of language, which will be far faster than I will be able to learn language.
I see.
And then also the fact that I tried doing it and I couldn't stick it out, I found it really frustrating because I could feel my brain was much slower. I was much better at learning languages when I was younger, and there was a lot of frustration associated with trying to learn a language at this age, I would say, that I wasn't expecting, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
We went to Italy this summer, and I stopped once I learned how to say 1 ice cream is gelato and 2 ice cream is due gelati. I was like, that's good. I can get 2 ice cream. I've learned the language. I am good. I won't go hungry, and I'll be happy. I have no doubt you're going to learn Korean. I think Korean's a great language. I've got a lot of Korean friends. In fact, I can even ask for water in Korean. You want to hear?
God.
물 주세요.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah?
That is correct as well. By the way, Seema's like, I have no idea. This is right,
no,
wrong.
but it's like, wait, but you still knew what that meant. So it's like,
I learned a little bit. I can order in a bar, like in a bar.
See?
I can order in a restaurant and a bar.
That's more than a baby can do.
Yeah.
Again, my expectations for myself are like,
yeah.
I know.
Which it pulls you, right? It pulls you to that next level.
It does.
And I think you're hitting on a really important concept that many of us we don't think about. And that is the standards that we hold ourselves to. If we have, and our standards come from an identity, right? You started off the show earlier by saying you work very hard. And I can relate to that identity. I believe that there is no better feeling than earning your tired. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you're just exhausted and you go to bed, or earning the right to be proud of something. And quite frankly, today is one of those days where I know I've earned my tired, and it feels great. It feels great to consume yourself, and I think that standard is the thing that I think as we change our identities and we change our standards, we can really unlock that additional potential we talked about that we have inside of us.
Yeah. We're our own worst critics. We're hardest on ourselves. We would never, ever, ever say to other people what we say to ourselves and subject ourselves to. And at the same time, there is something great about going to bed feeling sore, feeling like I've really served my purpose today. And, so that it's, again, I think all about integrating various aspects of the same concept to make it work, right? How that looks for you today may be very different than another day. But I love that you have, Malti, a purpose in why you want to achieve this goal, which will make it, so much more likely that you're going to be able to.
Yes.
And then on top of that too, like you have your husband there to help support you through it. I think a lot of people, when they learn language, for example, if they're the only ones learning, it's the practice part. Like you can, so you've got things in place aside from your class that are going to help you. So next year when you come on this podcast, you can do like a whole monologue in Korean. And before that, you and I we could have done this whole podcast in Gujarati, right? And Dinesh would have just had to figure it out, right? Like
Suche?
You're multilingual, Suche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A man of the world right here.
Man of the world right here. But oh my gosh.
I've got one question for you, Malti, before we wrap up. I'm going to read you a quote, and I want you to tell us what it means to you. Ready?
Ready.
You sure? Okay.
Yes.
What is to give light must endure burning? Viktor Frankl.
So to me, that is to do something wonderful, or to have that sparkle. You need to work. That's what that means. That burning is that work that needs to be done to achieve something. That's immediately what my mind goes to, for sure.
Yeah. Seema, did you see her light up in answering that question?
I did. Her whole face, like everything shifted. She went from resonating really high to then talking about her quote unquote failure. And then just immediately back to this, amazing fire that was lit. So, yeah.
I love it. And we like to ask our guests to teach us something that only they can teach us and our audience. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be physics or art related or necessarily something that's obvious, but teach us something, a life hack that only Malti Lee can teach us.
Well, I wouldn't say just me. I think lots of people can do this, but
Okay, we'll pretend it's just you.
let's pretend it's just me.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to like drawing, being able to see something and pick out the lines, the shape, forget what you're actually seeing in front of you, and just break it down to those elemental pieces. That's how you draw. You don't like draw like a face. You're drawing like the lines that would contour the face. You're not drawing a face. So I think that is how I learned to draw, but also I feel like that's how I approach life. Like break it down into the elemental pieces, not the big, you're going to have like a beautiful building at the end of this session on a page. It's going to be like one brick at a time. That's what you see. This little rectangle, let's go. So yeah, that's my life hack a la Malti B Lee.
Yeah.
I love it. So good.
I see that kind of reflected too. Again, so authentic because you talked about all of the different things that you did in life and just taking that one little step. So I love that really shines through for you. So we have a little game on our podcast. As you know, you've listened. It's called Ask It Forward, right? So the previous guest, listeners, if you are not familiar with how this works, the previous guest, not knowing who was going to come on the show next, left a question. And so we're going to ask that question of Malti, and then Malti's going to answer. And then Malti, you get to then leave a question for our next Happy and Human guest, not knowing who they are, how old they are, how they identify as far as, any of that. So are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. So this question is from Sharanya Rao. And she asked, what is your purpose?
My purpose is to constantly being on a learning journey. I think that's it for me. I just want to always be learning something new, growing as a person. For me, growing comes with learning. And yeah, living life with purpose is living a life that's full of new things that you're discovering always in all avenues of life. Yeah.
So good. I love
What is
that.
something that you would like to learn, but besides Korean, that you've repeatedly...
That's the big one right now, right?
Yeah, I have no doubt you're going to learn Korean. But what is one thing you'd like to learn that you've repeatedly pushed off in your life?
So something I am bad at and would like to address at some point, just not right now. I am not a strong writer. And and with that as well, I'm a very slow reader. So not for right now. I think something that I would like to improve at some point in my life will be my reading and writing skills as well. It takes me a very long time to write things. And I don't know why that is either, but it's okay. One thing at a time. One focus at a time. Yeah.
Says the PhD biophysicist / corporate amazing rock star / artist. So,
but what I will say is I focused on one thing at a time in those instances too. PhD, that was all consuming. When I wrote my thesis, I went to an island. My friend was living in the Channel Islands in Guernsey, which is a tiny little place where
Yeah.
you can walk from one end of the island to the other. There's not much going on. There's not great internet. So I went to stay with her for 6 weeks because I needed to write my thesis and couldn't really do anything else because there's nothing to do on the island. So
Wow.
yeah. And then consulting, same thing. I was all in consulting, learning how to do that. And now I'm all in figuring out this art business and my creative expression. So yeah.
Gosh. And then next year, full force Korean.
Well,
Yeah.
I would say full force. That's going to be a part-time thing, but yes.
Part-time thing. Full force.
Habit. I need to build a good habit around that. That's
habit.
what I need. Yes.
I think you're going to crush this Korean thing.
Malti, what is your question you would like to leave for our guest that is coming after you?
What is something that you did recently that took you out of your comfort zone? And what did that do for you?
Two-part question.
Two-part question. Let's go.
All right. You came to play.
Generosity is the key to success. And at the Happy Immune podcast, Seema and I benefit immensely from the guests that come on here. Our listeners really benefit from you sharing your wisdom and your path. But we also want to make sure that those who aren't able to connect with us can benefit from our show. So on behalf of our guests, Seema and I make a small contribution to a cause that is near and dear to the hearts of our guests. And we do this to, one, elevate the causes that we may not be aware of, bring some awareness to them, but also to actually make the contribution. So is there a cause or organization that is near and dear to your heart that you can share with us for us to make a contribution and share with our listeners?
Absolutely. So my charity of choice is always the National MS Society, Multiple Sclerosis Society. Whilst I haven't really interacted with the folks in the US as much, the charity, which is the sister charity in the UK, was and continues to be incredibly a powerful support for people with MS and their families, and also pioneering the research and funding research to find the causes and cures, hopefully someday in the future.
So
terrific.
Good.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, we look forward to supporting it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Malti, thank you so much for making time to connect with our listeners and with us. And we're so excited to see all the wonderful things that are sure to come your way. And we're here cheering you on. Thank you.
Let our listeners know where they can find you, where they can see your art or purchase your art, and how they can connect with you.
Yeah, the best way to find me on the internet is on my website. It's maltiblee.com. And then I'm very active on Instagram too. So my handle is @Malti B Lee. Very straightforward. I would love to connect with folks.